Please, Father.
I'm sorry, Bran.
Lord Stark, there are 5 pops. 1 for each of the Stark children. The direwolf is a sigil of your house. They were meant to have them.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm analyzing the first full chapter in George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones novel. It's Bran's initial POV. A few months ago, I started this series with a look at the prologue. I'll link that one down below for those interested. But let's dive into Bran 1. Right off the top, George sets the stage for what's coming with the line, quote, "The morning had dawned clear and cold, with a crispness that hinted at the end of summer," end quote. Ned Stark has brought his sons to witness the execution of Garrett, a man he sees as a Night's Watch deserter. He's the lone survivor from the 3-person expedition north that was described in the prologue. This will be the first time that Bran will see justice served by his father. And while the focus in this chapter is on Bran, we get so much more. As with much of what George does, there's a ton packed into what is only a little over 8 pages. There's a mention of Mance Rayder, the King Beyond the Wall, the Wildlings, Old Nan's stories, the Others, and the Long Night. We understand the Night's Watch and their oath, Ned's position as Warden of the North, and Robert as King of the Realm. All this information flows seamlessly within the telling of the scene of the execution through Bran's eyes. The description of ice and Valyrian steel is a perfect example of how Martin so carefully crafts his writing to effortlessly provide description within the context of the narrative. He writes, quote, "Theon Greyjoy brought forth the sword, Ice. That sword was called. It was as wide across as a man's hand, and taller even than Robb. The blade was Valyrian steel, spell-forged and as dark as smoke. Nothing held an edge like Valyrian steel." Ned, as we'll see as the story moves forward, is inflexible when it comes to matters of the realm, and that's demonstrated here as we first see him. He's oblivious to any nuance as to why the man deserted the Night's Watch. And just as he delivers what he sees as justice by taking the man's head, Ned himself will lose his own because he's unable to move beyond black and white and entertain any gray areas. There's right and wrong and no middle ground. This being Bran's first execution, Jon tells him that he can't take his eyes away, that his father will know if he does. Bran doesn't look away, and he even watches all of the blood as it spreads. We also get a quick glimpse at Theon's character. Garrett's head rolls away and lands near him, and Theon kicks it away. This angers and disgusts Jon, but only Bran picks up on his reaction. It might not jump out at you the first time that you read this chapter, but George very early on points at how smart and observant Jon is. There's a difference of opinion between him and Robb about how the deserter died. Robb thinks he died bravely. Jon disagrees. Martin writes, "No," Jon Snow said quietly, "it was not courage. This one was dead of fear. You could see it in his eyes." We know Jon is right here because we're aware of what Garrett went through beyond the wall, and I really like how George points it out with this line. Jon's eyes were a gray, so dark they seemed almost black, but there was little they did not see. And this is all going to tie in too with the direwolves they're going to find, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Ned checks on how Bran is doing after the execution. Bran talks a bit about Old Nan's tales of the Others, which Ned brushes off, demonstrating how little credence he gives to White Walkers and how far most people in the North have drifted from the times in which those threats were real. He focuses more on what's before him, whether something is right or wrong. Since he's the one tasked with administering justice in the North, he believes that the man who passes the sentence must also swing the sword. Robb then finds a dead direwolf, and George describes Bran's first reaction as he arrives on the scene. But it was the size of it that made him gasp. It was bigger than his pony, twice the size of the largest hound in his father's kennel. There's some symbolic foreshadowing here, too. They find that the direwolf was killed by the antlers of a stag. A stag is the sigil of House Baratheon, as the direwolf is for the Starks. And of course, Ned will follow Robert to King's Landing, where both will die. So all the attention turns to the pups. One of Ned's men mentions that they won't last very long, and then Theon endears himself to all around by jumping eagerly at the mention of the pups dying soon. Martin writes, "The sooner the better," Theon Greyjoy agreed. He drew his sword. "Give the beast here, Bran." So Bran strongly protests. Robb tells Theon to put his sword away. Bran then tries to convince his father to let them keep them. Robb supports him by saying Sir Roderick's dog had a small litter and he'll have enough milk for the direwolf pups. Ned, though, remains unconvinced, saying the dog will rip them apart when they try to nurse. And this is where Jon displays his first selfless act. Martin writes, "Lord Stark," Jon said. It was strange to hear him call father that so formal. Bran looked at him with desperate hope. "There are 5 pups," he told father. 3 male, 2 female. "What of it, Jon?" "You have 5 true-born children," Jon said. 3 sons, 2 daughters. The direwolf is the sigil of your house. Your children were meant to have these pups, my lord. So I think Jon here is demonstrating a great deal of strength along with his selflessness. Bran recognized immediately what Jon had done, separating himself from the family. Ned did too, and pressed Jon if he wanted none for himself. And then Jon says, "The direwolf graces the banners of House Stark. I am no Stark, father." Ned is finally swayed, and they leave and cross the bridge. From there, Jon stops and says, "Can you hear it?" He's the only one that did. So he hurries back to where they had recovered the other pups and finds Ghost. Martin writes, "His fur was white, where the rest of the litter was gray. His eyes were as red as the blood of the ragged man who had died that morning." Bran thought it curious that this pup would have opened his eyes while the others were still blind. The importance of Ghost being the only one to open his eyes also demonstrates that Jon has a greater level of maturity than the other Stark children. He's also more perceptive. He was able to see that Garrett wasn't really brave. He was just broken. Of course, Jon doesn't know exactly what happened, but we know. It's due to what he experienced beyond the wall. The first Bran chapter is a great introduction to the story, with so much packed into those few pages. This is a series I'll continue periodically, analyzing the chapters in the order they were written. So if you enjoyed this one, hit the like button. And if you're interested in more on A Song of Ice and Fire and House of the Dragon, listen to Caraxes and subscribe. As always, I want to thank everyone for watching, and I'll see you soon.